From the Asgard Company Studios in beautiful Wichita Falls, Texas, from the finest mind in the modern fitness industry, the one true voice in the strength and conditioning profession, the most important podcast on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, starting Strength Radio. Welcome back to Starting Strength Radio. It's Friday, and so are we. And again, we're here with our friend John Horgan. John's a science writer. He writes occasionally for Scientific American, various other places. Wherever they'll have him, he'll go. And we had John on several weeks ago talking about cancer, and I enjoyed the discussion so much that I called him today and I said, "What the hell are you doing this afternoon?" And he said, "Oh, several important things." And I said, "Well, would you talk to me instead?" And he said, all right, what the hell. So here we are. I haven't even discussed this with John. So this might be a really interesting discussion. I wanted to talk to him about the current situation with COVID-19. John, being a science writer, is going to have informed opinions about a couple of different aspects of this. And I want to know what he thinks about the disease, and I want to know what he thinks about the economic ramifications of this thing. So we're going to talk about the whole thing. John, thanks for being with us today.
Sure, my pleasure, Mark.
So we were just talking a minute ago about there is a paper been released. It was last Friday, I think it was published, or the pre-publication. It hadn't been reviewed yet. Is that right? The Santa Clara County study that was an antibody study that was attempting to take a sample of the population in Santa Clara County, California, and extrapolate those results out to the whole county to see how many actual infections they thought were present in the county, so that we could get a little bit better indication of the fatality rate of the disease. And what I understand is right now that there were some objections, some preliminary objections to the statistical analysis, and I think they're in the process of correcting some of those, and they're going to reissue the thing. What have you heard about that?
I don't think I've heard as much as you have, to be honest. I've read a couple of references to this paper online. I haven't read the paper itself, but I've seen some discussion of it. All I can say is John Ioannidis is a very serious, meticulous researcher. He often comes up with very controversial positions, especially challenging the scientific mainstream. But I'd say over time, his conclusions have been validated by subsequent research. This has happened in some of the things he said about the medical literature, for example. When we talked about cancer, I was relying for my own very critical analysis of cancer medicine on some research done by Ioannidis and a bunch of other people. So as far as this recent paper you're talking about on how many people actually are infected versus the number of people who have died, it doesn't surprise me that he would be doing this, because he had a paper, I think in late March, that was questioning the response to this epidemic and whether maybe we were overreacting. So he was saying some of the same things that people around the country have said, which is that maybe the cure is worse than the disease. But if I may just comment on what I understand about his new paper, so he's looking for people who have been infected, but they're not still showing symptoms, so they have antibody responses. Mm-hmm. And this is really important research. So we know exactly how many people have actually been infected and are protected from being reinfected possibly. And it seems to me one way you can interpret it is that there are many more people infected than we've assumed previously, and that means that the number of fatalities as a proportion of the number of infections is really low. And that is good news, all right?
Yes, yes, it is.
But the bad side of it is that this thing is much more infectious than we've assumed. And it's spreading more rapidly through the population than we assumed.
Mm-hmm.
You still have the problem that the reason that I don't think a comparison of this to the flu is appropriate is because we already are very quickly reaching the same numbers of fatalities as a really bad flu season. I mean, it blew past 40,000, I think, yesterday or the day before, 40,000 fatalities for the United States. And that, there's no sign that this is going to stop anytime soon.
I've seen data from New York City. The New York City Public Health, New York City Health Department keeps a daily updated website. I don't know if you've seen this thing, that their graph under daily counts, it's like the third thing down on the page, and the daily counts they record cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. All three of those parameters are tailing off rather strongly.
Right.
Even in New York City, which is an obvious outlier because the rest of the country has not experienced this situation at all to the same extent New York City has. And the question on everybody else's mind that doesn't live in New York City or northern New Jersey is, what about us?
Right.
When do we get to go back to work? When are we going to be allowed to leave our homes? And so I want to talk about the disease, but I want to talk about the economic ramifications of an over-response to the disease. And the over-response to the disease is largely due to the fact that the models very early on that predicted in excess of 2 million deaths in the United States were so laughably wrong that, an order of magnitude or 3 wrong. And here you're talking about 40,000 deaths. They were talking about 2.2 million. They're not comparable numbers. And the response to one and the response to the other, our H1N1 death toll back in 2009 and 10 was 61,000 people. Now, those are estimates. Of course, all flu numbers are estimates because people don't test for the flu. But IFI, influenza-like illnesses, during that epidemic killed, the last number I saw was 61,000 people. And here we are, we've got flu season and COVID-19, and I don't know what the number is right now if you combine those two. I don't know what it is. But I do know that as of last Friday, 22 million people had filed for unemployment. And that's just the number of people that have filed for unemployment.
Including both of my children, by the way.
Yeah, and this is, I hate to be all adult and everything, but people die, and people are out of work all the time. Mm-hmm. But to compare those two phenomena, this is another discussion, and I know nobody wants to have that discussion. Everybody would like it if nobody died, but we're all grown-ups and shit, and we know that everybody dies. And to put maybe 35 million people out of work so far, and that's not over.
Absolutely.
So that people don't get sick and die. That's not rational.
I want to go back to what the figure of 2.2 million. I think it was. This was from a study done by a British university.
Neil Ferguson was his name.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was Imperial College London,
Yeah.
and was very influential. The Trump administration took it very seriously. A lot of other people took it seriously. That 2 million figure was an estimate of what would happen if we did nothing. If
Well,
we,
now that's an interesting thing because I've been told I don't know where I picked this up that all of those early estimates, those models, all factored in the new word of the year, social distancing, into that model. They all had considered mitigation procedures, not just completely let's just slobber on each other and do like we always do, and that's pretending like we do that in flu season. We don't act that way in flu season. Nobody does. Some people over the millennia have learned that in the winter you wash your hands. But let's just so the 2.2. Let's say that it didn't involve any mitigation. Well, that's kind of a silly assumption to make with a model about a disease that's going to kill a bunch of people. So I don't know where he came up with that. And in fact, within 10 days, he had retracted that number and revised it back down to 60,000. Now, and you remember that was a couple of weeks ago when that was revealed. And I'm just thinking, my God, how careful was the man?
yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I suspect that you know more about this than I do, but I'll
No,
just
I don't. I wouldn't suspect that if I were you. But I do know that we've got some lunatic running around here in Wichita Falls telling everybody still to this day that this COVID-19 is 10 times as deadly as the flu. And you really had to have turned off the internet to still be running around talking like that, because that's just not the case. And public health policy made under that assumption is going to be very expensive and very, very wrong.
let me just give you a piece of information. I heard a discussion of this exact issue on a radio show. I'm being interviewed as an expert, even though I'm very far from an expert. And one of the actual experts on this show was talking about the rate of infection, and how there are some of these estimates that say that there are a lot more infections than we think they are, than are actually being counted, and therefore the fatality rate is quite low. He said the problem is that the cruise ships, when you have these closed populations where pretty much everybody is infected, they're seeing very high fatality rates. So at this point, the uncertainties are so enormous that they're trying to reconcile data from all these different sources. The cruise ships are a big, important data point that are pretty scary when it comes to fatality rates. But if you look at the rates from different countries, to the extent that we have reliable data, they show fatality rates that are all over the place.
Well, and I think we both understand that this particular disease selects old people to kill. And if you've got any skew in that direction in your demographic, you're gonna show different data than if you look at a generalized population across all demographics.
Yeah.
For example, I don't know how many. I think you probably can count on the fingers of both hands the number of people under the age of 5 that have died all over the world from this disease. It just doesn't kill children.
It's tiny, fortunately, yes.
And if you're over the age of 75, you've got something like a 20 times more higher likelihood of dying from the disease than somebody even under the age of 55.
Right.
So, and cruise ships are all skewed toward old people who can afford to go on a cruise. I'm less concerned with those little small sample, non-representative demographic groups You know, the thing early on. What was the Princess? What was the? I keep trying to call the ship the Princess Bride, but that was a movie. What the hell is the name of the cruise ship that was that it received a lot of attention?
Yeah.
And I think something on the order of 17% of the people on that ship were actually infected, despite the fact that it was a closed environment. But then you look a little bit closer at the data, and you see that the seed cases were removed from the ship early, and there were several other mitigation factors that were involved in this. And so it wasn't necessarily good data in either direction because the skewed demographic, and they removed some of the early cases. But
listen, you're raising really good questions. I'm not sure where to go with it. I mean, I was just on a conference call with all the faculty at my university. I'm in Hoboken, New Jersey, at an engineering school called Stevens Institute, and we were talking about whether we're going to be open next fall, and this would be a huge blow. What students don't want to pay all this money to be with their parents having online learning.
You know, and if you keep charging them all that money, they're going to go somewhere else. And this may end up being a very important social experiment in terms of the value of homeschooling. You know, there are going to be so many unintended consequences of this ridiculous exercise in hysteria. We will be sorting this out for generations. We will. This is the most profound thing that's happened, certainly over the past couple of 100 years. This is, and it's profound in that it is powered entirely by fear of getting sick. And you know, you can attribute that to human nature. You can attribute that to politics. You can attribute it to a complicit media. You know, but if everyone around you is terrified about this for one reason or another, and people do silly things when they're scared. You know, I remember last year I was having to kill some rattlesnakes out on the side of my hill at the house, and one of them struck and got one of his fangs hooked in my pant leg. And I did stupid things for about 10 seconds. Real stupid things for about 10 seconds. Some of which I don't even remember doing. Fear makes you do stupid shit. It really does. And this situation is definitely, a buddy of mine saw a guy the other day jogging down a country road with a mask on. People are treating this like it's Ebola, and it's not. Now, if this was Ebola, you know, the Chinese would have a lot better bioweapon on their hands, wouldn't they? This is...
Mark, let me just... I guess I think it's certainly possible that you're right, and we're going to look back on this even, I don't know, a couple of months from now.
Yeah, I think so.
And say that we grossly overreacted. I guess my position, and maybe it's just because I'm closer to the epicenter in the United States, being in northern New Jersey, right across the river from New York. I think it's too early to say, and that all the not the worst predictions, but some of the really serious predictions could still turn out to be true, that the cases are still multiplying rapidly. I can just give you a personal perspective. I'm pretty sure I was infected about 6 weeks ago.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay,
I don't know what your experience with it was, but we had gone to Las Vegas middle of February to do a seminar, and then we had another seminar in Wichita Falls the first weekend of March. I got sick about 10 days, 11, 12 days after we got back from Las Vegas, and I was sick, kind of sick on Thursday, pretty sick Friday, sick Saturday, and Sunday afternoon about 5 o'clock I felt okay, but I had all of the. Maybe you're going to probably tell me the same thing. You were coughing. You had an unproductive cough. You were very, very tired. You might have been conscious of a low-grade fever, and that would have been, the skin on your back hurt. Your low back skin hurts. That's what fevers do. And I've been coughing ever since, but I've been coughing a lot for quite some time. It's like that. And I will tell you that my O2 sat has been down about 93%. And
What's that?
O2 saturation, your oxygen saturation in your blood. My heart rate has been elevated, abnormally elevated. My O2 saturation has been lower. In fact, I am showing the same numbers on my little pulse oximeter in Wichita Falls that I normally show at 9,300 feet in Colorado. And I have no doubt that that's what I had. Nick had it when we got back. Shortly after I got sick, he got sick. What did you feel when you had this thing?
I had started off as like my throat was kind of scratchy. I was coughing a little bit, and then about 24 hours later, I felt like shit. I felt achy all over. I started getting really hot. I was sweating a lot, and I had maybe 48 hours where I was as sick as I've been as an adult. This was I lost my appetite for a while. I sweated through. I was wearing 4 or 5 T-shirts a night because they would be completely drenched in sweat. I had the chills too, so it was the first time.
Oh, you had a pretty good fever then, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was.
Oh, yeah.
I was really sick. If it happened to me now, I assumed it was the flu then, because this was so early.
Yeah, that's what I said. I never really got that much. I didn't feel like I had the flu. I felt like I had a chest cold.
Yeah. No, I was sick. If I got it now, I would be terrified that I might die of respiratory failure any minute. I probably would have gone
funny? Because you weren't terrified then, but you would be terrified now. They've done their job, haven't they?
Yes.
I didn't lose my sense of smell, but I almost lost my sense of smell. I've lost my sense of smell during a head cold and a chest cold several times. What I've noticed when that happens is that it starts at the bottom and comes up. I can feel it progressing from lower thoracic up into higher thoracic, and then if it goes up my throat, it'll end up in my sinuses, and I won't be able to smell.
Yeah.
It didn't get that far this time. I got real aggressive with it, and I washed my nose out with salt water 3 or 4 times a day, and I think that kind of killed it back a little bit. But it didn't get that far along. I've lost my sense of smell several times. But I recognized that I was headed in that direction. I certainly was. Did you lose your sense of smell?
It didn't even occur to me to think about my sense of smell. I felt so crappy.
So goddamn sick that it didn't matter.
I remember I did. It was dinner time, and I made myself plate of food, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, it looked disgusting. I completely lost my appetite. I never threw up, but I was kind of nauseous, and these are all very common symptoms.
Right.
So I don't know. For me, it was it was pretty serious. I don't know what to tell you, Mark. I think this is an issue that we're all going to be grappling with. And
Mm-hmm.
as I said, I think it's kind of too early to know whether this is a reaction. Do you want to get into the politics of this? Because I'll just tell you right now, I'm a classic bleeding heart liberal Democrat, maybe even
Well,
to the
of
left.
course, you live in New Jersey. Jesus Christ, and I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm a self-employed 65-year-old, 64. I'm sorry, 64-year-old Texan, and
Yeah.
I
With
am I'm a conservative libertarian.
Mhm.
I am real unhappy with other people assuming that their judgment about my affairs is better than mine. That irritates me real bad.
This is the same problem that comes up in the context of vaccines in general, is that the libertarian position is sort of tricky because our individual decisions have social effects.
Mm-hmm.
So,
They
you
can,
can
sure. Yeah.
opt out of getting a vaccine, but if too many people opt out, you lose the herd immunity that it's all those
No,
kinds of.
I understand that, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I mean, I've got a science background just like you do, and I think that's an absurd position.
Mhm.
But I also aware that they are trying to get a vaccine ready so fast, and if they ram the thing through by virtue of the fact that they've made people very, very afraid of catching this disease when they needn't be afraid to catch the disease. I'm aware of the science that indicates that sometimes vaccines, if they're not properly prepared, can cause an immune system over response.
Yeah.
And that's a serious problem. I think that once the vaccine is introduced, I think that there's a lot of reasons to take the thing. But by the same token, I just saw something on this yesterday. There are some indications that the old-fashioned oral poliomyelitis vaccine might show immune system boosting for this.
Hmm.
And that's damned interesting, isn't it? You just need a little bit. Your immune system needs a little bit of help. But if you overstimulate it, then you have the potential to start producing, a hyperactive immune response to things that don't need to be acted upon. And as we know, that's kind of like autoimmune disorders. And these
Listen,
things this is something that has to be considered by this blanket approach. And if we are propelled forward into this process by irrational fear, which is what's going on right now, then we are going to make some serious mistakes.
I want to go back to what you just said about vaccines, because this is something that I thought of writing about a month ago. I came across a couple of papers on suggesting that the flu vaccine might actually make people more susceptible to non-flu infections, including the coronavirus.
Interesting.
And there was a paper, a study done of Defense Department personnel. It was a big study. I think it was a couple of 100,000 people, and who all got the flu vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And then they looked at them over time to see how susceptible they were to other infections. And it turned out that the people who got the vaccine were more susceptible to a coronavirus. This is pre-COVID-19. It was earlier coronaviruses,
Mm-hmm.
but they were more susceptible to coronavirus infections than people who had not gotten the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
So, and meanwhile, we're all being told to get the flu vaccine because then there's more room there in the hospitals for people who get COVID-19 before we get a vaccine to that. And this is something that it's called like vaccine interference or something. It's like you get vaccinated for one thing, and it might make you more vulnerable to a different pathogen.
Right.
And I wrote the lead author on this one paper because this seemed extremely important to me, and asked him to comment, and he just referred me to Air Force Public Affairs. And I'm
Well,
hoping
no,
to
that's
write.
interesting.
Well, because it's obviously so controversial,
Yeah, he
right?
didn't want to. He didn't want to go on record
Right.
about that. You can kind of understand the.
So I'm just telling you that I agree that we need to be careful.
I have had the flu shot every year since it's been available. I remember probably 30 years ago. I remember getting the flu twice in one winter, and I didn't want that shit again.
Right.
That was it was a long couple of months, and so I've had the flu shot every year, and I haven't had the flu in a long time. But for as many people as you talk to that'll tell you that, you'll talk to people that have had the flu shot, and they say, hell, I get the flu shot every year, and I get the flu every year. So it doesn't seem to matter. You can go either way on the flu shot. Some years it works better than other years. This year I heard it was like 20% effective. And but my thinking on it is $25. What the hell? But I wasn't aware of the fact that it might be interfering with immune response to coronaviruses. I will keep that in mind, since now, looking back on my particular situation, I'm real sure I had this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure all of the symptoms were equal to a mild case of the way COVID-19 is usually described. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And it may be because I had the flu shot. That's something to think about. But this overwhelming the healthcare system thing has been the reason we've been told, and you mentioned this, that we've been told that we all need to do all these quarantine procedures, and really this is a reverse quarantine. We're keeping everybody else inside. Normally in a quarantine you keep sick people inside. This reverse quarantine was so that we didn't overwhelm the healthcare system. It appears to me is that every possible thing you could do wrong, we have done. Right? Every single possible thing we could do wrong has been done. I mean, it's like we went through and decided, well, let's see, what would make sense in this situation? Well, let's do the opposite of that. So here in Wichita Falls, and this is true all over the country except for where you are, our hospitals are empty. We've got 2 hospitals in Wichita Falls. This is 125,000 market. We got a large corporate evil hospital downtown, and we have a private hospital out on the west side of town. Private hospital's closed, and the large evil corporate hospital downtown is about 80% empty. And the reason for this is they stopped accepting what were considered non-essential, which means anything except COVID-19 related cases. I don't know what's going on down there now, but we're recording this on a Wednesday, just so you people in the far distant future will know that there's a 2-day delay between when I'm talking to John and when you're watching this. Last week, our little ICU at the downtown hospital here was empty. It was empty. There was no one in the ICU. And the hospital's losing its ass. All hospitals around the country that are in this situation are losing their asses right now. And this is a gigantic loss of income for lots and lots of people. Not just, the effects of this bizarre overreaction to this thing are rippling through a lot of people are getting a real serious economics lesson right now. What are the acceptable numbers of deaths? And this is one of these adult questions that nobody wants to talk about. especially if you're a politician. You know, the brilliant governor of New York has been on record several times as saying if it saves one life, it was worth it. The only people that say that are people who have to be elected. But people that have actual responsibilities to more than just the average voter understand that that's not a reasonable thing to say. It's not a reasonable thing to say. I mean, I'm looking at this data every day. I've got this thread on my board that I'm babysitting about every 30 minutes, and I'm probably as plugged into this as a lay person can be. And I'm seeing things tailing off real hard. I'm not seeing exponential growth. The thing appears to have peaked in New York City on about the 2nd of April. And it's, I'm real sorry about New York City, but if you concentrate 10 million people in a 30 square mile area, you've got a transmission vector there that the rest of us don't deal with.
Right.
Is it fair to put the rest of us under the same quarantine procedures, lockdown procedures, house arrest procedures?
What are people talking about in Texas? I assume that the governor of Texas has quite a bit of power to determine local.
The governors of all the states are basically the ones that have decided all of this. Mm-hmm. The governor of Texas is generally a pretty good guy, but I think he's kind of rolled over on his back on this. Mm-hmm. I don't know him, so he won't ever hear me say that about him. But I pretty much like the guy, but this is unnecessary and it's expensive, and he's got a responsibility to a whole bunch of people who are not sick. He's got more responsibility to a bunch of people who are not sick than he does to a bunch of people who might get that way.
Don't you think it's possible he's seeing some models that suggest that your big urban areas are going to start looking like New York before long? My understanding is that there's just a time lag. New York is a very international city. You got a lot of travelers coming from Europe who infected New Yorkers. And so we started really early here. Mm-hmm. And you might be right that we're tailing off at this point. But that, I don't know, Houston and, the big cities in Texas and Chicago and Los Angeles, that they are going to be going through what we've gone through at some point. There just might be a time lag of a couple of weeks.
Well, if he's saying that, if he's seeing that data, he is not really paying any attention to it. Mm-hmm. Because what he has said is that he's going to allow the state. I really like that word, allow. That makes me feel warm and happy when I'm allowed to use my property. Next Monday, which is Monday the 27th, is when he's going to relax some things. Mm-hmm. All right. Now,
all your schools are shut down?
Yeah, all the schools are shut down. They just canceled school from, the whole semester's been canceled. All the public schools are shut down. All the kids been sent home. They'll miss 3 months of school this year. I'm of the opinion that's probably not a terrible thing. Public schools do such a shitty job of what it is. If I was as shitty as the public schools, I'd be starving to death right now. But they do a terrible job and they're closed, and that's good as far as I'm concerned. But if he's seeing data that indicates that Houston and Dallas are about to explode with COVID-19, I haven't seen any data that indicate that. What data I've seen is that New York City is kind of by itself in the level of transmission and the level of infection. Mm. And I haven't seen, California has not reacted that way. Yeah. There's not any place else in North America that's behaved in terms of this epidemiology the way New York City has. it's interesting to me that we have been so willing to stop participating in doing business with each other. I mean, just as a general observation, work is a way to turn time into value, right? And we've all been out of work now for a month. A lot of us have been out of work now for a month, and that's a whole bunch of value that's been lost. The second quarter GDP estimate, have you seen that?
I have not. I just
down
have to
25%.
Wow.
I mean, now think about that. Now, that's a projection. It could be wrong. But based on what we've seen first quarter, second quarter GDP, which ends June 30th, is projected to have lost 25%. That's never happened before. That didn't happen in the 1920s and 30s. It's never happened in any other situation, especially not over one quarter to another quarter. It's never occurred. And it's impossible to predict the ramifications of that. It really is. But that's a very profound event. And
absolutely.
Here's my real important question. All right. Everybody's modeling how many people are going to die of COVID-19. Is anybody modeling how many people are going to die as a result of the response to COVID-19?
As I recall,
I'd like to know what those numbers are.
As I recall, that Ioannidis essay, or maybe it was something else.
He talked about it on this video I saw him record.
Well, as I recall, there were some figures relating unemployment to
suicide,
to mortality.
Yes.
And
suicide, illness, poverty, starvation, privation, hunger, depression, mental illness, all this other stuff. They've calculated every time unemployment goes up 1%, there are numbers associated with that. There's a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the model that associates what we know about the current unemployment situation and all the businesses that are closed and all of the businesses that you in New Jersey, the place you used to like to go eat, it's gone.
Right. Yeah.
It's gone. It's not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the stuff that makes New York the greatest city on earth? Little shops and cafes and stuff. They're gone. There's a lot of big restaurants that I used to like to go to in Dallas-Fort Worth. You probably heard of Papado, the Pappas Brothers family of restaurants. Are they going to be in existence after this? How do you... They've been talking about, I heard, talked to a friend of mine in Denver today. They're going to allow, there's that word again, allow restaurants to open, but no more than 30% of their capacity. At no more than 30% of their capacity. In other words, Friday night is going to look like Tuesday night.
Right.
How can a restaurant do that?
I would assume the only way they could make it work is if this is a transition back to business as normal. But I think some people are talking about restaurants having to build social distancing permanently into their floor plan.
This is so insane. We have had communicable disease. We've had smallpox for our history on the planet. We have shared this place with viruses and bacteria, and we have never allowed them to dictate the way we operate society before, until 6 weeks ago. And furthermore, and I think this is terribly important, this is going to happen again now, isn't it? And what are we going to do next time? What are they going to do to us next time? And what does that do to future investment decisions that people make? They've divided us into essential and non-essential businesses. John, if you got investment money, are you going to invest in a non-essential business like a haircut salon, like a bar? They're non-essential.
There's surveillance issue. I mean,
Oh
a lot
my
of
God, they're drones. They're operating drones to make sure that you stay in your house.
right,
Oh God.
and scanners to make sure that your temperature is okay, and the possibility of biometric data being gathered from your cell phone to find out if you're feverish or
Right.
you have symptoms of.
I'm not interested in living in a society that controls every aspect of my activities. It's certainly not every aspect of my business during the day. And I'm 64. Look, if 6 years from now, I'm 70 and I have to die of coronavirus so that the kids here in the room with me don't have to live in a police state. Hey, I've had a good time. I've had a good life. I've got to do a bunch of cool stuff.
Listen, let me address that. My last post for Scientific American was whether the headline was something like, "Is COVID-19 going to make us more socialist?" And in it, I tried to, yeah, you'd love it, Mark.
Yeah.
I tried to distinguish there is democratic socialism, which I think is benign, where you have a government organized response to a pandemic like this that's just sensible and even necessary. And then you have an authoritarian, compulsory socialist response of the kind that you get in China, for example, where if you get infected, they're going to take you and put you somewhere and put you under mandatory quarantine, and they tell you when you can get out. So it seems to me that we've got to figure out how to be able to, maybe we're overreacting to this one, but let's say we're not. How are we going to react to this and to other pandemics in the future? We've got to do it in a way that's consistent with basic human rights and our desire for privacy and with democracy. That's the question.
We are right now 20,000 people away from being equal to the H1N1 swine flu epidemic in 2009, 2010. We got a little ways to go. Now, let's say that the COVID-19 death toll goes up to 60,000. And if we're going to be cavalier with counting people's lives, let's say it goes up to 80,000. But it costs us the foundations of our society in terms of private employment.
I'm sensitive. I've got children. I've got my students who are asking these questions. My children are asking. I mean, everybody I know is thinking about what kind of political future, what sort of social system are we going to have in the future as a response to this? And it seems to me it could go in lots of different ways, some of which I think will make the world better. And we will have a more rational response to this in the future that minimizes the damage. It could go in other directions that I think would be really dark.
Well, I'm
scared.
The only thing I can see is in my analysis, the primary damage came from the power that the governments and this is this whole thing is state, county, and local. All right, mm-hmm. The federal government hadn't participated in this overreach at all. Now, they made some stupid suggestions, but they've not actually. I mean, the mayor of Wichita Falls is what is the problem here in Wichita Falls. The governor of the state of Texas, the county judge in Wichita County, are the problems we're dealing with right now. I'm not concerned with Donald Trump. We're mm-hmm. concerned with state, county, and local here, and they have assumed the power to declare my business non-essential. Mm. Now, I don't know. In previous iterations of American history, the market got to dictate whether my business was essential. My attribution to this is that we have become a nation of cowards. And I don't want millions of people to die, but there's no data that suggests that millions of people are going to die. And we're behaving as though they are, and they're not. Millions of people are not going to die. Millions of people were never going to die. You know, how many people do automobile accidents kill every year? And we hadn't banned cars. It's exactly the same thing. Don't tell me it's not the same thing. It's a cost-benefit analysis.
I'm glad I'm getting nobody is talking this way back here in New Jersey and New York.
Not.
And I think I'm glad to be part of this conversation and hear you saying these things. They're really interesting, and I think I'm going to talk to my students about them.
I think you should, because I'd like to hear what they have to say about it. These kids have got their, you and I are old fuckers, but those kids, they've got years and years and decades left, and I think it would be important to understand how they want to live them.
It's funny. I just remembered a friend of mine. He's a chemist who sends me things and gives me ideas to write about all the time. And just this morning, he said, he saw this thing that I wrote on, are we going to become more socialist as a result of this thing? And he said, why don't you talk to some libertarians? Hear what they have to say about this.
Well, here you are.
And here I am.
This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is your 60-day free trial of socialism.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, we sure will, won't we? Thanks for being with us, John.
Thank you,
Appreciate your
Mark.
time. We'll talk again soon. And
All
thank
right.
you guys for being here for Starting Strength Radio. We'll see you next week.